Hey, gang. I'm coming to you obviously from my office on campus here today. So, this is our second Tuesday, and I'm still trying to work out the kinks of uploading the videos. Didn't have time to do it before I left the house this morning, so here I am on campus. I don't have my microphone, so the sound quality might not be quite as good, but should still be able to get through the material. So today, this week, this is the video for our second week of 320, and we have two readings. One comes from this book here by Harry Weinberg, Levels of Knowing and Existence, just the preface. By the way, the first page has a little note from our Stanford Berman donor here: to the faculty and students at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, with best wishes. And then the second reading comes from this book. Believe it or not, this is actually a book that I purchased when I was like y'all's age. When I was an undergraduate, I took a class. I can't even remember what class it was, but it required this book. So this is my own book that I've had in my library for many years. And it's been kind of fun to pull it back off the shelf and go through it again. So we have the preface in the Weinberg book, and then we have a chapter on symbols in the Hayakawa. These are both pretty canonical figures in the general semantics movement. 59 for Weinberg, and then I think Hayakawa's a little later, 80s, I think. Actually, no, this one goes back to the 40s as well. Interesting. So yeah, so we're in the same rough time period here, middle part of the last century. And again, these are just a couple of little pieces that are continuing to lay out some of the basic beats, some of the kind of fundamental assumptions and concepts that were associated with general semantics. And so once again, we have the Stanley Fish little selection of pages there where he's talking about rhetoric man and serious man, and obviously we talked about general semantics as being within that serious man tradition, and I think we see lots more evidence of that today or this week, especially with that Weinberg reading. Some of the ways just sort of the way that they talk about their project and some of the little kind of offhanded remarks are quite revealing. And as I mentioned last time, these are called prompts or reading notes, reading prompts, and these are also associated with the readings, just meant to help simplify and guide you through them. So hopefully that's plenty to help you, with the material, get through the material, and now talk about it a little bit. All right, so Weinberg, some basic concepts. Here the key move he wants to make is to sort of think about the distinctions between facts and inferences. This is an important concern of the general semantic project, right? So serious man wants to be as objective as possible. Serious man wants knowledge to be as reliable and certain as possible. And then, of course, serious man wants language to faithfully reflect that certain objective knowledge, right? So facts are something that we want to take seriously if we are following the general semantic sort of agenda. What is a fact? Well, he starts off by saying that facts are verifiable descriptions based on observation, not just visual observation, but other senses, all the senses: smell, taste, touch. This goes back to Francis Bacon in the 17th century and the very beginnings of the scientific method, which is all about empirical kind of testing and verifying, right? So a fact is a fact when we are able to sort of demonstrate, prove, test, empirically observe and document and detail the existence of this thing, right? So let's say you just got a new dog. A fact would be, how heavy it is, how tall and long, and what colors, breed, history, right? These are all like things that you can point to, verify, document, observe. So they have that factual quality about them. That's distinct from an inference, which, what does he say about inference? He says that This is first page. An inferential statement is not limited by observation. It is a statement about that which has not been observed, right? So a fact is direct observation, direct experience, empirical, sense-based, verifiable, documentable. An inference is an assumption that we're making based on certain signs, let's say, right? And as he's going through all these different examples of inferences, I'm thinking to myself, life is just a series of inferences we're constantly making, right? As we're moving through, just think about your day to day and think about what you've done and think about like all the little kind of micro inferences you make about like, is this person still in the house? Is it time to feed the dog? How do I know it's time to feed the dog or let the dog out? Is the dog whining? I just became a grandparent. I haven't shared this, but I'm a grandparent. I'm a grandfather. As of like a week ago, our oldest child had a child. So technically that makes me a grandfather. I haven't seen the baby yet because they want to do this sort of baby quarantine for a month, which is really a whole thing. In any case, imagine that we have a little baby, you're a first-time parent, you're constantly making inferences based on little noises and based on little behaviors. You're making guesses. And I think that inferences are such an important part of just daily life, right? Like knowing or guessing or assuming when it's time to move or when you want to hold back, right? There's a lot of information that we glean through that inferential process. The point that Weinberg wants to make is that it's a faulty process. By its very nature, inferences are guesses. And the general semanticists are not big fans of like squishy stuff, right? Uncertain stuff. Don't forget, serious man wants certainty. Inferences are not about certainty. They're about basically kind of probabilities, right? It's like this will likely happen. We're drawing on our assumptions based on kind of prior experiences, but we're making guesses. We're making sort of inferences about what will happen based on what we're perceiving. But the general semantics approach wants to get always closer to the realm of the factual. He has this weird example of if I stick my head out a window and water falls on it, then I know it's raining. It's like, okay, you're observing water falling on your head, but you're still kind of making an inference about it being raining. I mean, if you look up and you don't see any clouds, there's about 3 or 4 or 5 very reasonable possibilities about what water falling off from the sky could be. You know, someone could be washing windows above you. They could be watering their plants above you. So there's a lot of different kind of conclusions that one could make. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a fact that it's raining. And this is already where we're getting into this problem of like facts are not 100% certain. He says many times in this chapter, facts approach certainty. Inferences are guesses and they have higher or lesser degrees of probability, but facts are the things that we want to sort of try to achieve and strive for, right? He says on page 16 that facts approach certainty. Approach is important because as he also notes, and this is a recurrent theme with the general semanticists, is that we can never actually access reality itself. This is getting a little bit more technical than we need to get right now, but the point is like, we can touch a thing. We can measure a dog. The example of like, I think he even talks about measuring a dog. But like you can measure a dog and then you can measure it again and you can get finer and finer and closer, more detailed numbers to describe exactly what that dog is. Like what's the actual number for pi? 3.14, and it just sort of goes forever, right? Each number gets slightly closer to the reality. But the point is that we can never actually reach actual reality. We just can only kind of approach it as close as we can through our instruments of observation and analysis, our fact-based empirical instruments, right? So the distinction between facts and inferences is a little bit murky, but nevertheless, for the general semanticists, it's still the facts that we want to be always pursuing, right? Is it going to rain today? I don't know. what are the facts? What are the actual facts on the ground that we can marshal together to come up with that true statement? So that's the first major move he wants to make is facts. They're about certainty. They're observational. They're verifiable. Inferences are guesses. We do them all the time. He admits that it's sort of perfectly fine that we use inferences, but the general semanticist is sort of uncomfortable with just operating based on inferences because we're not drawing on hard objective data, essentially, right? And then the next thing that he wants to add to this little twist with this business of inferences, this is on, I think it's 16 again. This business of standards is the next kind of key thing. So we got facts, inferences, and then this business of standards. The choice of standards, how long is it really? Next page over, 17 at the bottom, he says, the choice of standard is determined by the purpose for which the thing being measured is used. Please make sure that you underline and star that. This idea that a standard is connected to a purpose, right? If we don't have factual data about a thing and we must make inferences about it, what are those inferences based on? Or what are those guesses based on? They're based on some other kind of reliable measure of what something is or could be. That other reliable measure is our standard, right? You ever go to a movie with friends and maybe it's like a new, Marvel movie or whatever, action, superhero kind of thing, and you get out of it after when you have this big argument about the movie. One of you liked it, one of you hated it. What are you relying on for that set of inferences you're making about the movie, whether it's good or bad or whatever? Chances are you have some kind of like external standard that you're drawing on, whether it's an aesthetic standard, whether it's a sociological standard, whether it's a performance kind of acting standard, or maybe your standard has to do with, I don't know, how much money or what kind of a carbon footprint the production created in making this movie. You might have any kind of standard, but that standard is probably driving your sense of the goodness or badness of the thing. So it's important to recognize that these standards, these kind of metrics or measure sticks that we use, they might not be physical meters or whatever, or scales or whatever, but we have certain standards that we rely on. When you go out for a meal, you like it, you don't like it. Based on what? What's your standard? Is it about cost? Is it about freshness? Is it about uniqueness? Is it about, and so on and so on and so on. So standards are important for our understanding of how to sort of measure and infer and analyze stuff. Yep. He does acknowledge on 18 that there's a measure, this is the top of 18, there's an element of arbitrariness in the selection of all standards. Indeed, right? This is now rhetoric man talking. There is no outside of language. There is no standard outside of any kind of linguistic or symbolic means that we would use. That is the sort of the God standard that can inform our standard to let us know if that standard is correct or not, right? So even our standards are sort of our own creations, and there's a certain arbitrariness, meaning a kind of like whimsical selectiveness to what we're using as our standard. And I think that we find this when we do have these debates over like non-objective empirical things. If we're debating about food or a movie or, someone got a new car. Do you like that car? Well, my main standard is the environment. And so, no, I hate your new Ford F-150. Or maybe my standard is ruggedness and durability and reliance in times of uncertainty. Well, then that Ford F-150 is a great vehicle, right? So it really depends on kind of where you're coming from. All right. That's sort of the main points of this chapter right there. He'll complicate the business of inferences, as he should, right? And he says at the top of page 21, that first full paragraph, he says, we find this confusion of factual and inferential knowledge in almost all areas of human behavior. As I've noted, a fact is not so far from an inference, right? We are inferring that a fact is a fact because of all of the stuff that we use to corroborate it as a fact. But it's hard to sort of get away from that there's a bit of an inference here. They're still kind of calling this a fact, even though in some ultimate objective sense, it might not actually be a fact. So there's still a kind of arbitrariness with what is a fact and what's an inference. Nevertheless, if we're thinking of like a spectrum, and on this end of the spectrum is 100% absolute certainty, and on this end of the spectrum is like zero certainty, total uncertainty, right? Facts are at the more certain end of the spectrum, whereas inferences are more in the kind of less certain, right? So these are degrees of certainty we're talking about here. Facts, much closer to certainty. Inferences, much further from certainty. And yet we use them all the time. The thing that he really wants to do in this chapter is to just basically get us to realize more consciously, more self-consciously, to be realizing when we're using inferences. And the fact that we are using inferences means that we're guessing. It's even like these guys are so hardcore that they would even suggest that like when we wake up in the morning and we assume that the sun has come up, that's an inference, right? It's not necessarily a fact. The sun could die, and it will at some point. It might take 1 billion years. But their point is like it's still an inference that it's going to come up, right? So there you see like the inference fact thing is slippery. But his main idea is let us be conscious of the fact that we make inferences all the time. Inferences are based on limited partial data. They're based on a lot of times just our kind of wishful thinking or our, just reflexive kind of response to a situation. And they're therefore, this is the perspective of serious man, they're therefore sort of untrustworthy, right? So the basic gist of this is like, let us be more self-aware of the fact that we are using inferences, and if we are, then we'll be less pissed off when we get wrong. We will take fewer things like in a defensive posture. If we just know that we're guessing, this is a guess, most things are guesses, then we're probably not going to get too worked up if we realize that we're wrong. Yeah, it's just an inference. He's saying that the problem is we too often confuse our inferences with our beliefs. And we think that just because we assume something is this way or that way, that it is that way or that way. And therefore, if we're proven wrong, then we get all worked up about it, right? So let's just acknowledge that most of what we do is make inferences about sort of things that we're seeing and experiencing, and that therefore we are operating from a position of low probability at most times. So it's a kind of a modesty thing. He says toward the end there, he talks about 22. He talks about making inferences as a form of infantile semantic reaction to a situation. This idea of, the more you go away from hard facts, the more kind of infantile and childish you are in your thinking. This is a constant theme that we'll see in this general semantic stuff. This is serious man stuff. It's like, smarten up. You need to stop being so inferential. You need to just rely on hard facts. It's this weird kind of paternalistic thing of like, smarten up your language use there, boy, or smarten up your thoughts there, kid. Stop being so inferential. You're making your assumptions based on limited data. And so this idea of the infantile semantic reaction to a situation is just sort of like that kind of rubs you the wrong way. That's the serious man thing. And on 29, toward the end, we get into this map territory thing. We're going to get to that one more time with Hayakawa here in just a sec. 17 minutes, yeah. So let me go ahead and turn to Hayakawa. The map does not equal the territory. The representation, the symbol, the idea is not the thing out in the real world. That's the key idea. So again, genosemantics really wants to be distinct and clear about here we are, here's the external world, here's our language. We need to do our very best to make sure that we're getting accurate, objective information about what's going on out there, that we are understanding when we are being accurate and when we are not being accurate, and then we are using language accurately, reflectively, and appropriately.